The old woman's worn shoes scraped against marble. "Remove her, now." Two guards yanked her arms. The wedding guests laughed. Champagne glasses clinked. She stumbled, fell to her knees. But then she stopped struggling. Her spine straightened. The trembling hands, steady now. She lifted her head, eyes like black ice. 23 years I built an empire. Her voice, no longer weak. Steel, pure steel. 23 years I protected my family. The wig came off, gray hair, dark underneath. "And this is how you repay my son?" The bride's glass shattered on the floor. The groom's face drained white. "Mrs. Castellano," he whispered, "you're supposed to be dead." The doors exploded open, a man in the shadows, dozen more behind him. The old beggar woman smiled. "Surprise, darling, I'm not so easy to get rid of." The wedding guests realized they weren't watching a celebration. They were watching a reckoning. Before we go any further, do me a quick favor. If you're loving this already, smash that like button right now. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I read every single one. And if you're new here, hit subscribe because you're not going to want to miss how this ends. Trust me. Now, let me take you to how this all started. The Fairmont's Grand Ballroom glittered like a jewel box that October evening, every surface catching and reflecting light until the entire space seemed to pulse with golden radiance. 3 massive crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling, each one worth more than most Chicagoans earned in a lifetime. Their prismatic glow cascaded over 200 guests dressed in designer gowns and bespoke tuxedos, turning champagne flutes into liquid amber and making diamond jewelry spark like captured stars. White roses, thousands of them, adorned every surface. They climbed the marble columns in cascading arrangements, crowned each of the 20 round tables, and created a fragrant pathway leading to an altar draped in ivory silk. The 12-piece orchestra occupied a raised platform near the east wall, their instruments singing out a Mozart concerto that floated through the air like something ethereal, something untouchable. Marcus Chen stood at the altar in a Tom Ford tuxedo that fit him like a second skin, his posture radiating the confidence of a man who'd conquered the world. At 34, he possessed the sharp features and calculating eyes of someone who knew exactly what he wanted and how to take it. Beside him, Victoria Romano was a vision in Vera Wang, her mermaid gown hugging every curve before flowing into a cathedral train that seemed to go on forever. Her dark hair was swept into an elegant chignon, her neck adorned with a diamond necklace that probably cost 6 figures. They were Chicago's golden couple, the whispered legend at every cocktail party and boardroom. 2 years ago, they'd been ambitious nobodies. Now, they owned half the commercial real estate in the Loop and had investment portfolios that made seasoned traders weep with envy. "Such a meteoric rise," an older woman murmured to her husband at table 7, her voice carrying just enough to be heard. "Smart investments," her husband replied, though doubts flickered in his eyes. "Lucky timing." Marcus's smile never wavered as he surveyed his kingdom, but his eyes moved constantly, cataloging every face, every exit. Victoria's fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted her bouquet of white peonies. Her gaze darted toward the entrance every second as though expecting something or someone to shatter this perfect tableau. The champagne flowed. The guests laughed. The orchestra played on. And then, through the towering entrance doors, a hunched figure in tattered rags shuffled forward from the October darkness, her shadow falling across the threshold like an omen. The woman moved with the painful slowness of someone whose bones had forgotten how to cooperate. Her back curved into a severe hunch, forcing her face downward toward the ground. Layers of filthy clothing hung from her skeletal frame. a stained brown coat held together with safety pins, a dress beneath it that might have once been blue, and a worn shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the bite of October wind. Her gray hair hung in matted clumps around a face carved with deep lines, each wrinkle telling stories of hardship and survival on streets that showed no mercy. "Please," she whispered to the doorman, her voice cracking like old parchment. She extended one trembling hand, the knuckles swollen with arthritis, fingers blackened with grime. Just a moment, just to feel the warmth. Perhaps a scrap from the tables? They'll have so much food, they won't miss. The doorman, a thick-necked man named Gerald, recoiled as though she'd offered him plague. His lip curled in undisguised revulsion. "Get back," he snapped, reaching for his radio. "Security to the main entrance, now." Within 30 seconds, two massive figures appeared, moving in perfect synchronization. Jake and Ryan Foster were identical in every way. 6'4" walls of muscle poured into black suits, their square jaws set with professional disinterest, their eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses despite the evening hour. Marcus Chen paid them handsomely to be imposing, unquestioning, and efficient. "Ma'am, this is a private event," Jake said, his voice flat and cold. Each brother took one of her thin arms, their large hands encircling her wrists completely. "No, please, I only wanted just to see." Her words dissolved into soft, desperate pleas that seemed to fracture something in the air. The commotion rippled inward like stones thrown into still water. Conversation near the entrance faltered, heads turned. The orchestra continued playing, but guests were no longer listening. At the altar, Marcus froze mid-smile, his eyes locked on the woman at the door, and for just a fraction of a second, his carefully constructed mask slipped. What flickered across his face wasn't disgust or annoyance, it was recognition, raw, unmistakable fear. Victoria saw it. Her hand shot out, fingers digging into Marcus's forearm hard enough to leave marks through the expensive fabric. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice tight with panic. "Who is—" Marcus commanded, his voice cutting through the ballroom with startling sharpness. "Now, get her out of here." The guards began dragging the woman backward, her worn shoes scraped against polished marble, leaving faint marks on perfection itself. Jake and Ryan's grip tightened, their fingers digging into the woman's thin arms with casual brutality. They hauled her backwards, her feet barely touching the ground, her body limped as a rag doll in their iron grasp. The sound of her shoes, cracked leather soles held together with duct tape, scraping across the pristine marble floor, echoed through the suddenly quiet ballroom like nails on a chalkboard. "Please," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "Just let me see. I only wanted to see." A burst of laughter erupted from table 3. A young man in his 20s, already drunk on expensive champagne, nudged his companion. "Jesus, the wildlife really comes out at night in this city, doesn't it?" Others averted their eyes, returning to their conversations with forced enthusiasm. A woman in a blood-red Versace gown muttered to her husband, "Utterly tasteless. Can't they handle these things more discreetly?" Victoria leaned close to Marcus, her manicured nails still embedded in his arm. Her breath came quick and shallow. "Marcus?" she hissed, barely audible. "Are you sure it's not—" "Impossible." His jaw clenched so hard a muscle jumped in his cheek. "She's dead. We made certain. This is just some vagrant who—" "But the way you looked—" "It's nothing," he snapped, then smoothed his features back into a smile. "Just unfortunate timing." Halfway to the exit, the elderly woman's legs gave out. She crumpled to her knees with a cry of pain, her brittle bones hitting marble with a sickening crack. The guards didn't slow. They simply adjusted their grip and continued dragging her, now on her knees, her dress tearing beneath her. At table 12, Mrs. Patricia Harrington, 70 years old, dripping in family diamonds, widow of a railroad magnate, set down her champagne flute with a trembling hand. She'd grown up in Pilsen, in a tenement that smelled of cabbage and desperation. She'd worn second-hand shoes with holes in them. She'd known hunger. "This is wrong," she whispered to herself, but made no move to intervene. None of them did. The woman's weeping filled the spaces between musical notes, raw and broken and human. 23 years, she moaned through her tears, the words garbled and strange. 23 years! They reached the threshold. The October wind howled beyond doors, cold and merciless. And then the woman stopped weeping. Her body, which had been limp and broken just seconds before, went completely still. The guards felt the change immediately, the shift from victim to something else entirely. When she lifted her head, her eyes were no longer clouded with age and despair. They burned like black fire. The guards' hands loosened instinctively. Something primal warned them to let go, to step back. But training kept their fingers locked around her arms even as uncertainty crept into their identical faces. The woman's bent spine began to straighten, slowly, vertebra by vertebra. The hunch that had made her appear ancient and broken melted away like wax under flame. Her shoulders rolled back, her chest lifted. Within seconds, she stood at her full height, 5'7" of coiled, dangerous grace. She lifted her head, and the transformation of her face was even more startling than her posture. Gone was the clouded, roomy gaze of the elderly and defeated. Instead, her eyes, dark as obsidian, sharp as broken glass, fixed on Marcus Chen with the kind of focus that could strip flesh from bone. 23 years, she said, and her voice was no longer the crackling whisper of dried leaves. It was steel. It was ice. It was the voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. 23 years I spent building an empire. 23 years I protected my family. And this is how you repay my son? The ballroom died. The orchestra's violins squeaked into silence mid-note. 200 conversations cut off as if someone had pressed mute on reality itself. Even the champagne seemed to stop bubbling in crystal flutes. With deliberate, theatrical precision, the woman reached up and pulled at her gray hair. The entire matted wig came away in her hands, revealing thick, dark hair beneath, naturally streaked with silver at the temples, but lustrous and vital. She dropped the wig to the marble floor like discarded garbage. Next came the tattered shawl. She unwrapped it from her shoulders, letting it fall, and beneath the filthy rags was a simple but unmistakably elegant black dress. Givenchy, if anyone had been paying close enough attention. Classic, timeless, expensive. From her pocket, she produced a white handkerchief. She wiped at her face, removing layers of expertly applied makeup that had created jowls, wrinkles, and age spots. The weathered skin sloughed away like a mask, revealing strong, aristocratic features, high cheekbones, a proud nose, a jawline that spoke of generations of power. The room recognized her before she said her name. "Elena Castellano," someone breathed from table 8. The whisper spread like wildfire. Elena Castellano, the widow of Chicago, the woman who'd made grown men weep with a single phone call, the matriarch of an empire built on blood, loyalty, and ruthless intelligence. The woman they'd all believed was dead. Victoria's champagne flute slipped from her fingers. It shattered on the marble floor, the sound like a gunshot in the terrible silence. Marcus stumbled backward, his face drained of every drop of color. "Mrs. Castellano? Elena? I thought you were dead?" Elena's smile was a blade. "Yes, I know exactly what you thought."
The ornate entrance doors exploded inward with a crash that made half the guests scream. Vincent Castellano stood silhouetted against the Chicago night, and behind him, an army waited in the shadows.
Elena moved forward with the measured steps of a predator, her eyes never leaving the couple at the altar. Marcus and Victoria stood frozen, their perfect wedding tableau crumbling into something grotesque and obscene. "Tell them," Elena commanded, her voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom. "Tell these good people what you told my son. What beautiful lie did you craft for Vincent?" Marcus's throat worked, but no sound emerged. Victoria pressed herself against him, her Vera Wang gown suddenly looking less like bridal elegance and more like a shroud. "Nothing to say?" Elena's laugh was bitter as burnt coffee. "Then I'll tell them myself. 2 years ago, you came to Vincent with tears in your eyes. You told him his mother, me, had passed away peacefully in her sleep at our Lake Forest estate. You said I'd been sick for weeks, but hadn't wanted to worry him while he was managing the New York operations." The guests leaned forward, hungry for every word. "You staged a funeral," Elena continued, her voice hardening with each syllable. "You hired actors to play mourners. You bought a casket, filled it with sandbags, and buried it in Graceland Cemetery. You even commissioned a headstone, Italian marble, very tasteful." Victoria flinched as though struck. "While my son drowned in grief, while he isolated himself in the penthouse, unable to eat, unable to sleep, you two got to work." Elena's hands clenched at her sides. "You emptied 17 bank accounts. You sold 4 properties in the Loop, 3 in Lincoln Park, 2 in the Gold Coast. You dismantled our shipping operations, sold our legitimate businesses, liquidated investments worth $73 million. Gasps rippled through the crowd like dominoes falling. "Marcus." Elena turned her gaze on him and he physically recoiled. "You worked for the Castellano family for 15 years. Vincent trusted you with everything. He called you brother. He made you CFO, gave you access to accounts his own cousins couldn't touch." Marcus's jaw clenched. "I earned that position." "And Victoria." Elena's attention shifted to the bride whose face had gone bone white. "I raised you. When your father drank himself to death and your mother abandoned you, who took you in? Who paid for your education at Northwestern? Who loved you like a daughter?" "Elena, please," Victoria's voice cracked. "You were engaged to my son," Elena continued mercilessly. "You wore his grandmother's ring. You planned your wedding, not this obscene charade, but a real wedding. And then you saw an opportunity." Victoria straightened suddenly, desperation making her reckless. "We did what we had to survive. The business was changing. The old ways were dying." "Survive." Elena's voice could have frozen the sun. "You stole everything. You didn't survive. You murdered and plundered." At table 12, Mrs. Patricia Harrington rose shakily to her feet. "Mrs. Castellano is right," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "This is unconscionable." Others shifted uncomfortably, but no one else stood. They knew which way the wind was blowing now. Marcus made a sharp gesture toward Jake and Ryan. "Remove her! I'm paying you." But the Foster twins didn't move. They stood rigid, their eyes darting between Marcus and the dozen dark figures now filing through the entrance behind Vincent Castellano. Vincent stepped fully into the light, and the resemblance to his mother was unmistakable. The same dark eyes, the same aristocratic features, the same aura of barely contained violence. "Hello, Victoria," he said softly. "You look beautiful." And then he pulled a gun from inside his jacket. The gun gleamed dully in the chandelier light, black metal, cold and absolute. But Vincent didn't point it at anyone. Not yet. He simply held it loosely at his side, a promise of violence waiting to be fulfilled. Vincent Castellano was 36 years old and built like someone who'd spent a lifetime preparing for war. 6'2", broad-shouldered, with the kind of controlled power that made people instinctively step back. His dark suit was impeccable, tailored perfectly to his frame, but it was his eyes that truly commanded attention, the same obsidian black as his mother's, burning with a fury so tightly leashed it was almost beautiful. Behind him, 12 men in identical dark suits filled the entrance like a living wall. They didn't speak, they didn't move. They simply existed as a reminder of what the Castellano name truly meant in this city. Elena turned to her son, and for the first time that evening, her iron composure cracked. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Surprise, my darling," she said, her voice breaking just slightly. "I'm not so easy to get rid of." Vincent's jaw clenched. For a moment, his carefully controlled mask slipped, and the raw anguish of 2 years hemorrhaged across his face. He'd spent 730 days believing she was dead, 730 days drowning in grief so profound he'd considered ending it all. He'd stood at her grave, a lie carved in Italian marble, and wept until he had nothing left. It was Carlo Moretti, his father's oldest friend, who'd found her. A warehouse outside Peoria, converted into a makeshift prison. She'd been drugged, kept sedated, hidden away where no one would think to look. The lawyer Marcus had hired to manage her estate had been the one to arrange it, paid handsomely for his silence. When Vincent finally reached her, she'd been barely conscious, but alive. Alive. "Mother," he managed, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't quite suppress. Marcus bolted. He made it 3 steps toward the kitchen entrance before 2 of Vincent's men materialized in his path like shadows given form. They didn't touch him, but their presence was enough. Marcus froze, trapped between the altar and the inevitable reckoning. "Vincent, please!" Victoria's voice cracked with desperation. She stumbled forward, her cathedral train dragging behind her like chains. "We can explain everything, if you just listen." "Listen?" Vincent's laugh was a razor blade dragged across bone. "Like I listened when you told me my mother was dead? Like I listened when you said you'd help me through my grief? Like I listened when you assured me you were managing her affairs with love and respect?" Victoria's face crumpled. "I loved you." "You loved my money," Elena cut in, her voice cold as winter. "You loved the power. You loved the empire we built." Around the ballroom, guests pulled out their phones. Mrs. Harrington aimed hers at Vincent, recording. Others frantically dialed, some calling police, others likely calling their own security, their own fixers, the elite protecting themselves, always. Marcus's hand moved slowly toward his jacket. His fingers slipped inside, reaching for something concealed in the silk lining. Vincent's gun came up in a single fluid motion. "Don't," he said quietly, but Marcus's hand kept moving, and the ballroom held its breath. "Take it out slowly," Vincent said, his voice unnervingly calm. "2 fingers. If I see anything except a phone or wallet, you're dead before you hit the ground." Marcus's hand trembled as he withdrew phone, just a phone, and let it clatter to the marble floor. Vincent didn't lower his gun. "You have 2 choices. Confess everything to the authorities when they arrive, or I handle this the old way. Right here, right now, in front of 200 witnesses." "Vincent," Marcus's voice cracked, "you don't understand the pressure, the debts, the truth. Now." The words came tumbling out like poison, finally purged. "I took her. I kidnapped Elena. I hired men to grab her from the Lake Forest house, drugged her, moved her to the facility upstate. I paid Dr. Gerald Moss $50,000 to sign a fraudulent death certificate. I arranged the funeral, the cremation paperwork, all of it was fake." Guests gasped, their phones capturing every word. Victoria collapsed to her knees, her dress pooling around her like spilled milk. "It was me," she sobbed. "I drugged her. I crushed the pills into her evening tea, Rohypnol, 3 doses over 2 weeks to make her disoriented. I was the one who called Marcus's men, who opened the back door, who watched them carry her out." Elena's face remained impassive, but her hands trembled slightly at her sides. "I seduced Marcus," Victoria continued, mascara streaming down her face. "I knew he was ambitious, frustrated with Vincent's cautious approach. I convinced him we could take everything if Elena was gone. We just needed Vincent broken enough to not ask questions." "We kept her alive," Marcus added desperately, as if this somehow absolved him. "We kept her sedated but alive in case we needed signatures, account information, anything she knew that wasn't documented." "How merciful," Elena said, her voice dripping acid. She stepped forward, pulling a folded document from inside her dress. "6 months ago, a nurse named Maria Rodriguez took Kitty on me. She reduced my medications, helped me regain lucidity, eventually helped me escape. I've spent half a year gathering evidence." She held up the document, pages of bank transfers, recordings, timestamps, witness statements. "I've been watching you, documenting every transaction, every forged signature, every lie. I chose tonight because I wanted witnesses. I wanted Chicago's elite to see exactly who you are." The wail of police sirens rose in the distance, growing louder with each second. "I called them before I walked through those doors," Elena said with grim satisfaction. The ballroom erupted in chaos. Guests surged toward exits. Some shouted questions. Others continued filming, already imagining the social media storm this would unleash. Through the main entrance, a woman in her 40s strode in, flanked by 6 uniformed officers. Detective Sarah Morrison, Chicago PD Financial Crimes Unit, her badge gleaming at her hip. She'd been investigating suspicious account movements tied to the Chen Romano business empire for 8 months. "Marcus Chen, Victoria Romano, you're under arrest for kidnapping, fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy." The handcuffs clicked shut with beautiful finality. At table 12, Mrs. Patricia Harrington wiped tears from her eyes and smiled. 2 weeks had transformed everything and nothing. The Lake Forest estate stood as it always had, a sprawling Victorian mansion overlooking the water, its gardens meticulously maintained, its windows gleaming in the autumn sunlight. But now it felt like home again, not a mausoleum haunted by false grief. Elena sat in the conservatory, afternoon light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. She looked different than she had that night at the Fairmont, softer somehow, the hard edges of vengeance smoothed by justice delivered. Vincent sat across from her, 2 cups of tea cooling between them. "I never stopped hearing your voice," Elena said quietly. "Even when the drugs made everything foggy, I heard you. Remembered the way you laughed as a child. It kept me sane." Vincent's throat tightened. "I should have known something was wrong. I should have questioned, investigated." "You trusted people you loved. That's not weakness, Vincent. That's humanity." She reached across and squeezed his hand. "What they did to us showed me something important. It showed me who I could count on when everything was stripped away. And it showed me I'm stronger than I ever imagined." The doorbell chimed softly. Moments later, Mrs. Patricia Harrington appeared in the doorway, elegant in a dove-gray suit, carrying a leather portfolio. "Mrs. Castellano? Vincent?" She smiled warmly. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Patricia, please," Elena gestured to a chair. "You're always welcome here." Mrs. Harrington sat, opening her portfolio. "I've been thinking about your legitimate shipping operations. I'd like to invest. $5 million to start, with options for more as you expand." Vincent raised his eyebrows. "That's generous." "That's good business," Patricia corrected, "and it's standing with people who have integrity. What you both displayed that night, the restraint, the pursuit of justice over revenge, that impressed me deeply." On the television in the corner, a news anchor's voice drifted across the room. In Marcus Chen and Victoria Romano face a combined 23 years in federal prison following their conviction on charges including kidnapping, fraud, and conspiracy. In a stunning turn of events, the victims, Elena reached for the remote and muted it. Enough of them. They took 2 years of our lives. They don't get another minute. Vincent nodded slowly. I want to rebuild differently, Mother. More honestly. Less reliance on the old methods. Legitimate businesses, clean money, a legacy we can be proud of. I hoped you'd say that. Elena's eyes glistened. I'll step back, advise when you need me, but this empire should be yours now. Build it your way. Our way, Vincent corrected gently. I need you, Mother, not as the boss, but as the woman who survived hell and came back stronger. That evening, they shared dinner in the main dining room, just the two of them, no staff hovering, no business associates interrupting. They talked about everything and nothing, childhood memories, future plans, the way the light hit the lake at sunset. After dinner, Elena wandered into the library. She paused before a gallery wall of family photographs, her fingers trailing across one particular frame. Vincent, at age 7, gap-toothed and grinning, chocolate smeared on his cheek. Vincent appeared beside her. What are you thinking? That some people are thrown away like beggars, discarded when they're no longer useful. But the strong ones, they rise again. They survive. They reclaim everything that was stolen from them. She turned to her son, her eyes fierce with love and determination. And we, my darling, are the strong ones. Remember this, true power isn't measured in wealth or control, it's measured in resilience. When life strips everything away, your character becomes your greatest asset. Those who betray you reveal their weakness, not yours. And sometimes, the greatest revenge is simply refusing to stay broken.